Philippe is back with me. Also joining us, Philip Rucker, Washington Post national editor and MSNBC political analyst, co-author of A Very Stable Genius and I Alone Can Fix It, and Juanita Tolliver, host of Crooked Media's What a Day podcast, also an MSNBC political analyst. So, Juanita, Biden's gaffes are not new, and this is what Matt Weiser reminded us of last night when he was following the press conference. In 2008, Biden introduced Obama as Barack America. He told a state senator who was paraplegic, "Stand up, Chuck, let them see you." And he touted a three-letter word, jobs, J-O-B-S. In 2010, he called Obama the first African-American in the history of the United States. Is this different, so different that he shouldn't run? Or is there something else at work here?
No, this is 30 or 40 years of Joe Biden being Joe Biden. And I also think that I am so grateful that Peter Alexander was able to shout that question to him before he left the stage. Because what Joe Biden did in that moment was he explicitly drew a contrast between him and a minor mix-up and the guy who's down at Mar-a-Lago literally meeting with Putin-aligned Viktor Orban, right? Like, that contrast is where Joe Biden wants attention. And I think there's an opportunity for more of that. But these flubs, these gaps, that's just who Biden is. I do think, though, with the continued pressure, it's going to be interesting to see if those increase or stay level and stay minor as he has continued. He's going to continue on the campaign trail. As he said, he's going to keep going and get out there, like he's going to be in Michigan today. We also know he's addressing members of Congress later today in calls with the Hispanic caucus, as well as that sit down with Lester Holt that'll be airing on Monday. So it's a question of, does that continue or does it continue to level out? Because I don't see that as a major disruption, especially when he stood up there for 59 minutes and took unscripted questions from 10 reporters impeccably and substantively at a level that Donald Trump could never.
So even if you accept that, Philippe, there are the times when he does seem to be staring off, perhaps unfocused. There are times when his sentences kind of just trail off or are a little confusing. It's understandable that his supporters are frustrated because Donald Trump does the same, and in their mind, even worse. But why has this taken hold the way it has, and what does he do about it, Philippe?
Well, I think he needs to relentlessly do what I'm going to relentlessly got to do. Is you got to keep coming back and say, look, I'm not running against the world record, thespian. I'm not running against the Guinness Book of Memorization. I'm running against a guy who has waged a war against the English language for decades. I, at least when I do it, am making a good point and know of what I'm talking about. I mean, this isn't, we talk about, oh my God, what is he going to say? Oh my God, what he said. The totality of that press conference is pretty remarkable. I mean, if you want to look at the two of them, and to my point about taking medical tests, could Donald Trump have stood there for nearly an hour and said even 10% of that, even understood what he was talking about? Yes, I understand the color of it, and I got upset with friends who were furiously blowing up my phone with, oh my God, he said Putin instead of Zelenskyy, or Trump instead of Harris. But you know what? It's not a problem if you accidentally say Trump. It's a problem if you actually think that Trump is your VP. Now, would it have been nice to back to the other point about helping Joe Biden, and the reason that voters can't get past this is partly because no one's helping him get past it. If some of these members or Democratic leaders who were saying Joe really needs to think about stepping aside, it would be great to see a tweet from them saying, you know what, I have my concerns, but come on, people, that is ridiculous. I do this for a living, and I muff words all the time. 99% of what that guy did last night was incredible, and Donald Trump couldn't do anything like that. He stood in NATO. He defended NATO. He talked about how important it is. NATO under Trump would be, just a pile of, like, Jenga letters.
So Philip Rucker, as I mentioned, Donald Trump is no stranger to gaffes himself. You literally wrote a book about it in some ways. He's mixed up Obama's name for Biden's, Hungary's leader for the leader of Turkey, and he confused Nikki Haley with Nancy Pelosi. Let me just play a couple of examples.
Nikki Haley is in charge of security. We offered her 10,000 people, soldiers, National Guard, so whatever they want. They turned it down.
Putin, has so little respect for Obama that he's starting to throw around the nuclear word. Viktor Orban. Did anyone ever hear of him? He's probably like one of the strongest leaders anywhere in the world. And he's the leader of right? He's the leader of Turkey.
So I think we've all talked about our phones blowing up, and one of the questions that I keep getting is from Democrats. Why does Joe Biden not get away with it? Donald Trump constantly gets away with it, and much worse. How does Donald Trump not seem to pay a price for those kinds of things that we just heard? And it's very different. It is very different for Joe Biden.
Yeah, well, Chris, it is a different situation for both of them, but I would just challenge the notion that Trump doesn't get away with it. He's described regularly in the Washington Post and lots of other news organizations for his rambling speeches, for his non sequiturs, for, some nonsensical arguments that he makes at news conferences, at his rallies on the regular. And, voters decided 4 years ago they didn't want that anymore in their president. So, there is some price that he's paid for his own, problems with oratory and sort of, direct communication. That being said, it's a different situation since the debate because, Biden was in front of 50 million Americans watching on television and had clearly struggles and challenges in that debate, both parrying some of the attacks and questions with Trump and then the lapses and moments where he was really showing his age. And so that's why this is such an acute crisis for Biden and for his administration at this moment. But it's very difficult to equate the two because it's not like Trump is the perfect orator. He has all sorts of problems in his own delivery, and that has been noted in the media over the years, and I think a lot of voters are aware of that.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.